Pick up something near you. Anything. Your phone charger. A shoelace. The drawstring on your hoodie. Look at it for a second longer than you normally would. Now try to imagine the first one. Not the first charger. The first anything like it. The first time a human being took loose, weak, useless plant fibers and turned them into a single line strong enough to hold weight. Because until somebody did that, there was no such thing as a line, no bowstring, no fishing net, no bag you could carry over your shoulder, no way to tie a stone to a stick and make an axe, no sail, no bridge, nothing that pulls, hangs, binds, or holds. Rope is so ordinary that it has become invisible. It is in your shoes, your car, your walls, your elevator, your clothes, and almost nobody has ever stopped to ask where it came from, or how hard it was to figure out, or what the world looked like before it existed. So how did humans invent rope? The answer is older than farming. Older than pottery. Older, it turns out, than our species being the only humans on the planet. And it starts with a physics problem that a lot of very clever animals never solved. Here is the problem. Plant fibers are pathetic on their own. Pull a strand of grass, a thread of bark, a length of nettle stem, and it snaps. You could break any single one of them with 2 fingers. They are short, they are weak, they fray. As raw material for holding anything heavy, they are close to worthless. But if you twist them, something strange happens. Take a handful of fibers, twist them all in one direction, tight. Now take a second bundle, twist it the same way, and then wrap the 2 bundles around each other in the opposite direction. And here is the part that feels almost like a trick. The 2 twists fight each other. Each bundle is trying to unwind, and by unwinding it grips harder onto its neighbor. The tension locks. The whole thing holds itself together permanently, with no knot, no glue, and no fastening of any kind. That is the entire secret of rope. Opposing twist, it is not a knot, it is a standoff, and once the fibers are locked together, friction does the rest. Thousands of short, weak strands, pressed against each other along their whole length, stop behaving like thousands of short, weak strands. They start behaving like one long, strong one. A rope is not a thing. A rope is an argument between 2 directions that never gets resolved. Somebody worked that out. In the dark. With no writing, no teacher, and no way to look it up. And now for the part that genuinely surprised archaeologists. In 2020, a team led by Bruce Hardy of Kenyon College published a paper in Scientific Reports describing something found at a rock shelter called Abri du Maras in southern France. Stuck to the underside of a stone flake was a fragment of cord, 6 millimeters long, barely visible, made from the inner bark of a conifer tree. Under the microscope, it was not a random tangle. It was 3 separate bundles of fiber, each twisted in one direction, then plied together in the other. A 3-ply cord. Exactly the structure I just described. It is between 41,000 and 52,000 years old. And the people living at Abri du Maras at that time were not us. They were Neanderthals. Sit with that for a second. Before our species had reliably settled Europe, another kind of human was already producing structured, plied cordage, which means they understood fiber. They understood twist. They almost certainly understood counting and pairing, because keeping 3 bundles organized while twisting them is not something you do by accident. And it means the technology is probably far older than that fragment, because nobody invents 3-ply rope on their first attempt. That fragment is not the beginning. That fragment is a survivor, which raises an uncomfortable question. If rope is that old and that important, why do we know almost nothing about it? Because it rots. This is the single biggest reason rope has been quietly written out of the story of human invention. Stone survives, bone survives, pottery survives, fiber does not. It is eaten by bacteria, broken down by moisture, and gone within years under normal conditions. Everything we have found survived by accident, in a freak pocket of dryness or a lucky layer of mineral. So the archaeological record is not showing you how rare rope was. It is showing you how rare good luck is. We are looking at a technology that was probably everywhere, through a window the size of a coin. And when the luck does hold, what comes out is remarkable. At Dzudzuana Cave in Georgia, a team led by Eliso Kvavadze published findings in Science in 2009 describing wild flax fibers roughly 30,000 years old, twisted, and some of them died, in black, gray, turquoise, and pink. These were not people scraping by with the bare minimum. They were making cord, and they were making it look nice. At Hohle Fels in southern Germany, Nicholas Conrad of the University of Tübingen and his team found a carved piece of mammoth ivory around 40,000 years old with 4 holes drilled through it, each one lined with deep spiral grooves. The interpretation is that fibers were fed through the holes, and the grooves twisted and controlled them as they were pulled. If that is right, it is not a rope. It is a machine for making rope, a tool whose only job is to make another tool. At Lascaux in France, in a cave famous for its paintings, researchers found something on the floor that almost nobody talks about. The fossilized imprint of a piece of 2-ply cord preserved in calcite, about 17,000 years old. And in Finland, at a site called Antrea, archaeologists recovered a fishing net made from willow bast, roughly 10,000 years old, complete with stone weights and bark floats. Someone knotted 30 meters of net by hand, and it worked well enough that people ate because of it. Now think about what rope actually unlocked, because this is where it stops being a craft and starts being the reason for almost everything else. Attach a sharp stone to a wooden handle with cord, and you have a hafted axe. That is not a small upgrade. That is the difference between hitting something with a rock and swinging a machine that multiplies your force. Bend a stick and connect the ends with a line, and you have a bow. Suddenly you can kill from 30 meters instead of 3. The entire relationship between humans and every large animal on Earth changes. String a net, and you can harvest a river instead of chasing one fish at a time. Weave a bag, and you can carry food, which means you can gather more than you can eat right now, which means surplus, which means storage, which means the beginning of everything that grain and cities and countries were later built on. Tie 2 logs together, and you have a raft. Rig a line to a piece of cloth, and you have a sail. Every island human beings ever reached, they reached because rope existed. We usually credit stone tools and fire for making us what we are. Rope belongs in that conversation, and it almost never gets invited, purely because it dissolves. By the time we get to written history, rope is not a curiosity anymore. It is heavy industry. The Egyptians made rope from papyrus and from date palm fiber at serious scale. In 2013, a team led by Pierre Tallet found a set of storage caves at Wadi al-Jarf on the Red Sea coast, containing coils of rope roughly 4,500 years old, still in usable condition. They belonged to boat crews working under the pharaoh Khufu, the same king whose pyramid was rising at Giza. Those ropes moved stone. Some of the largest blocks in the ancient world were dragged, levered, and lifted on twisted plant fiber. The Inca went further and made rope carry information. The quipu was a system of knotted cords where the type of knot, its position on the string, the direction of twist, and the color all encoded numbers and records. An empire administered on string. Then, in 1834, a German mining engineer named Wilhelm Albert did something that had not been done in the entire history of the material. Mines were getting deeper, and the hemp ropes hauling ore up the shafts kept failing under their own weight. Albert twisted wire instead of plant fiber, using the same opposing twist principle that had been running unchanged for at least 50,000 years. Steel wire rope. That single change is why we have suspension bridges. It is why we have cable cars, it is why we have elevators, and therefore why we have tall buildings, and therefore why cities look the way they do. Every skyline you have ever seen exists because someone applied a Stone Age idea to a stronger material. Then, in 1935, a chemist named Wallace Carruthers at DuPont produced nylon, and rope stopped being made from anything that ever grew. But the structure never changed. Pull apart a modern climbing rope, a mooring line, a steel cable, and you will find the same thing that Neanderthal held at Abri du Maras. Strands twisted one way, plied the other, holding themselves together through opposed tension. So, how did humans invent rope? They noticed that weak things become strong when they are forced to grip each other. They twisted fibers in one direction and wrapped them in the other, and discovered that the two forces would fight forever without ever letting go. They did it before agriculture, before pottery, before writing, and before our species was the only human species left. And then they used it to build absolutely everything. Was it invented once? Almost certainly not. Bark, grass, nettle, sinew, and hide exist nearly everywhere people do. Every continent has independent traditions of cordage, using whatever grew locally. The physics is the same everywhere, so the solution kept getting found. Here's the thing that stays with me. Rope survives in the record about as well as a whisper survives in a storm. We have a handful of fragments across 50,000 years, and every one of them is an accident. The looms, the nets, the bags, the bowstrings, the bindings on 100 million tools, the lines that pulled boats across open water and stone across desert, almost none of it is left. There is a whole invisible history of human ingenuity that simply dissolved into the ground. You are carrying a piece of it right now. Your shoelaces, the seam holding your shirt together. It is the oldest technology you own, and it is the one you will never once think about. Somebody, 50,000 years ago, sat down with a handful of bark and twisted it the wrong way on purpose. And that is why you can tie your shoes.